Hi, everyone. This is Miss Black Florida here, Elise Lewis, and for today's session, I am reading my college textbook, Biology. The authors of today's book are Neil A. Campbell, Martha R. Taylor, Eric J. Simon, Jane B. Reese, and Jean L. Dickey. The chapters include, I'm just going to briefly read the contents. Beginning with Biology Exploring Life on page 1, going on to Unit 1, The Life of the Cell. Unit 2, Cellular Reproduction and Genetics. Unit 3, Concepts of Evolution. Unit 4, The Evolution of Biological Diversity. Unit 5, Animals, Form and Function. Unit 6, Plants, Form and Function. And Unit 7, Ecology. I very much enjoyed reading this book for the first time, and I'm very much going to enjoy sharing it again with all of you. So without further ado, let's dive into Unit 1. Chapter 1, Biology, Exploring Life. Dining in the trees. A female leopard, Panthera pardus, and her young daughter have just killed a duiker, a small antelope, and preferred leopard meal. The pair could start their feast on the spot, but the mother instinctively knows that eating in the open might allow other predators, such as lions or hyenas, to steal their kill. The duiker is best consumed up in a tree, out of reach of thieves. The older leopard has hauled the family's prey up into the branches many times before. But this afternoon, the cub follows her mother's example and carries the meal herself. The mother, featured on the cover of this book, looks up from below. She will wait to eat, watching first to see how well her daughter has learned the lessons she'll need to survive. Leopards are the strongest climbers among the big cats that make up the genus Panthera. Scientific evidence indicates that members of Panthera, which include leopards, lions, tigers, and jaguars, last shared a common ancestor about 6 million years ago. This linkage still shows in these cats' large size, hunting prowess, and unique ability to roar. The leopard species, which is found across Africa and Asia, has the widest distribution of these big cats and displays many adaptations that enhance its survival. African leopards, for example, have features that help them thrive alongside Africa's regal lion. Leopards tend to be nocturnal hunters, whereas lions hunt during the day. And leopards take a much larger variety of prey items than lions. With average weights of about 58 kilograms or 128 pounds for males and 38 kilograms, 84 pounds for females. African leopards are only about a third the size of a typical lion, but leopards are slightly faster with top running speeds of 64 kilometers, 40 miles per hour. And with superior jumping skills that propel leopards to 6 meters or 20 feet through the air horizontally and about 3 meters vertically. The cat is an exceptional climber. Powerful jaw, neck, and shoulder muscles give the leopard the ability to pounce and kill prey with a quick bite, and the additional strength needed to haul prey upward, sometimes dragging a carcass as high as 15 meters into a tree. Other characteristics of the leopard contribute to their survival. With the exception of mothers rearing cubs, leopards are generally loners and maintain separate, non-overlapping territories. Thus, they do not compete with each other for prey. Sensitive whiskers on the face and head help the cat navigate through dense vegetation while hunting at night. The leopard's signature spotted coat, often an array of black patches, dappled across tawny or ochre fur, provides excellent camouflage in the dry grasses of the African plains. Leopards also thrive in desert areas, hilly country, or jungle terrain, and their coat color can vary from pale cream to deep gold, enabling them to blend in with their surroundings. This habitat flexibility of leopards is linked to their amazing diet flexibility. Leopards consume everything from beetles and birds to baboons, hares, and smaller cats. Antelopes, such as the dewy cur or the larger impala, are a frequent favorite among leopards living in the African savanna. Observers have noted leopards killing impala larger than themselves and still managing to drag the carcass high into tree branches. So far, the African leopard has fared better in the modern era than its leopard cousins farther north. In Asia, the pressures of human population growth mean less land for leopards to roam, less prey, and more hunters after the cat's beautiful fur. In southern Africa, vast protected refuges, such as the Sabi Sands Reserve of South Africa, where the leopard on the cover was photographed, help maintain the cat's numbers. But the African leopard still faces threats from illegal hunting. Farmers and ranchers, enraged when leopards snatch their livestock, also target the cats. With unique characteristics that let them thrive across a diversity of habitats, leopards offer a wonderful example of the adaptations of organisms that fit them to their environment. Traits such as coat camouflage, strong jaws, and climbing prowess make leopards successful hunters and enhance their ability to survive and reproduce. These adaptations are the result of evolution, the process of change that has transformed life on Earth from its earliest beginnings to the diversity of organisms living today. In this chapter, we begin our explorations of biology, the scientific study of life. We start by introducing some common themes in biology, which will help guide our study of life, its evolution, and all its diversity. Themes in the study of biology. 1.1. In life's hierarchy of organization, new properties emerge at each level. The study of life extends from the microscopic scale of cells, and molecules to the global scale of the biosphere. Figure 1.1 takes you on a tour of these levels of biological organization, starting at the highest level. At the upper left, we take a distant view of the biosphere, which consists of all the environments on Earth that support life, most regions of land, bodies of water, and the lower atmosphere. A closer look at one of these environments brings us to the level of an ecosystem, which consists of all the organisms living in a particular area, as well as the non-living physical components of the environment with which the organisms interact, such as air, soil, water, and sunlight. The entire array of organisms inhabiting a particular ecosystem is called a community. The community is the coastal ecosystem, shown in figure 1.1. It includes the pelicans and the fish they eat, as well as seagulls, raccoons that eat pelican eggs, a huge diversity of insects, mollusks, and worms, many different kinds of plants and fungi, and enormous numbers of microscopic organisms such as protists, algae, and bacteria. Each of these unique forms of life is called a species. A population consists of all the individuals of a species living in a specified area, such as all the brown pelicans in the coastal community. Below the population level in the hierarchy is the organism, an individual living thing. Within a complex organism, such as a pelican, life's hierarchy continues to unfold. An organ system, such as a circulatory system, digestive system, or nervous system, consists of several organs that work together in performing specific functions. For instance, The main organs of the nervous system are the brain, the spinal cord, and the nerves that transmit messages between the spinal cord and other parts of the body. A bird's nervous system controls its ability to fly. As we continue down through the hierarchy, each organ is made up of several different tissues, each with a specific function, and made up of a group of similar cells. The nervous tissue in a pelican's brain has millions of nerve cells organized into a communication network of spectacular complexity. A cell is separated from its environment by a boundary called a membrane. In the nerve cell, you can see several organelles, such as the nucleus. An organelle is a membrane-bound structure that performs a specific function in a cell. Finally, we reach the level of molecules in the hierarchy. A molecule is a cluster of atoms held together by chemical bonds. We show as our example DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA molecules, provide the blueprint for constructing the organism's other molecules and transmit this information from parents to offspring. In the computer graphic of a small section of DNA, each of the spheres represents an atom, the smallest particle of ordinary matter. Now, work your way in the opposite direction. In building life's hierarchy from molecules to the biosphere, it takes many molecules to build organelles and make a cell, many cells to make a tissue, several kinds of tissues to make an organ, and so on. At each new level, notice that there are novel properties that emerge, properties that were not part of the components at the preceding level. For example, life emerges at the level of the cell. A test tube full of organelles is not alive. Such properties illustrate an important theme of biology called emergent properties. The familiar saying that the whole is greater than the sum of its part captures this idea. The emergent properties of the whole result from the specific arrangement and interactions of the component parts. In the next two modules, we'll look at more themes in the study of life: the interaction of organisms with the environment, and the cell as the structural and functional unit of life. Consider this question: which of the following levels of biological organization includes all others in the list? Cell, molecule, organ, tissue. The correct answer is organ. 1.2. Living organisms interact with their environments, exchanging matter and energy. Organisms interact with both the living and non-living components of their environment. Figure 1.2 is a simplified diagram of these interactions in an African savanna. It shows cycling of chemical nutrients, producers such as plants, chemical energy, and consumers such as animal, along with other things like sunlight and heat. A tree, for example, absorbs water, H2O, and minerals from the soil, and its leaves take in carbon dioxide, CO2, from the air. In photosynthesis, a tree's leaves use energy from sunlight to convert CO2 and H2O to sugar and oxygen, O2. The tree releases O2 to the air, and its roots help form soil by breaking up rocks. Thus, both organism and environment are affected by the interactions between them. The consumers of the ecosystem eat plants and other animals. The giraffe eats leaves. The leopard, described in the chapter introduction, eats meat. All animals take in oxygen from the air and release carbon dioxide. Their wastes return other chemicals to the environment. Another vital part of the ecosystem includes the bacteria fungi, and small animals in the soil that decompose waste and the remains of dead organisms. These decomposers act as recyclers, changing complex matter into simpler mineral nutrients that plants can use. The dynamics of ecosystems include two major processes: the recycling of chemical nutrients and the flow of energy. These processes are illustrated in Figure 1.2. The most basic chemicals necessary for life, carbon dioxide, oxygen, water, and various minerals, flow from the air and soil to plants, to animals and decomposers, and back to the air and soil. As shown by the blue arrows in the figure, chemical nutrients cycle within an ecosystem. And in the image, the arrows go around in a circle. By contrast, an ecosystem gains and loses energy constantly. Energy flows into the ecosystem when plants and other photosynthesizers absorb light energy from the sun and convert it to chemical energy of sugars and other complex molecules. Chemical energy is then passed through a series of consumers and eventually decomposers, powering each organism in turn. In the process of these energy conversions between and within organisms, some energy is converted to heat, which is then lost from the system. In contrast to chemical nutrients, which recycle within an ecosystem, energy flows through an ecosystem, entering as light and exiting as heat. Consider this question. Explain how the photosynthesis of plants functions in both the cycling of chemical nutrients and the flow of energy in an ecosystem. Again, explain how the photosynthesis of plants functions in both the cycling of chemical nutrients and the flow of energy in an ecosystem. Here's the answer. Photosynthesis uses light to convert carbon dioxide and water to energy-rich food, making it the pathway by which both chemical nutrients and energy become available to most organisms. One point three. Cells are the structural and functional units of life. The cell has a special place in the hierarchy of biological organization. It is the level at which the properties of life emerge, the lowest level of structure that can perform all activities required for life. A cell can regulate its internal environment, take in and use energy, respond to its environment, and develop and maintain its complex organization. The ability of cells to give rise to new cells is the basis for all reproduction and for growth and repair of multicellular organisms. Your every movement and thought are based on the activities of muscle cells and nerve cells. Even a global process, such as the cycling of carbon, is the result of cellular activities, including the photosynthesis of plant cells and the cellular respiration of nearly all cells, a process that breaks down sugar for energy and releases carbon dioxide. Cells illustrate another theme of biology, the correlation of structure and function. Experience shows you that form generally fits function. A screwdriver tightens or loosens screws. A hammer pounds nails. Because of their form, these tools can't do each other's jobs. Applied to biology, this theme of form fitting function is a guide to the structure of life at all its organizational levels. The long extension of the nerve cell enables it to transmit impulses throughout the body. Often, analyzing a biological structure gives us clues about what it does and how it works. The properties of life emerge from the ordered interactions of the structures of a cell. Such a combination of components forms a more complex organization called a system. Cells are examples of biological systems, as are organisms and ecosystems. Systems and their emergent properties are not unique to life. Consider a box of bicycle parts. When all of the individual parts are properly assembled, the result is a mechanical system you can use for exercise or transportation. The emergent properties of life, however, are particularly challenging to study because of the unrivaled complexity of biological systems. At the cutting edge of large-scale research today is an approach called systems biology. The goal of systems biology is to construct models for the dynamic behavior of whole biological systems, ranging from the functioning of the biosphere to the complex molecular machinery of a cell. All cells share many characteristics. For example, every cell is enclosed by a membrane that regulates the passage of materials between the cell and its surroundings. And every cell uses DNA as its genetic information. There are two basic kinds of cells. A prokaryotic cell is much simpler and usually much smaller than a eukaryotic cell. The cells of the microorganisms we commonly call bacteria are prokaryotic. Forms of life, such as plants, animals, and fungi, are composed of eukaryotic cells. A eukaryotic cell is subdivided by internal membranes into many different functional compartments, or organelles, including the nucleus that houses the cell's DNA. In the next module, we'll see how DNA unifies all of life as we begin to explore the core theme of life, evolution. Question: explain why cells are considered the basic units of life. Answer: they are the lowest level in the hierarchy of biological organization at which the properties of life emerge. Evolution, the core theme of biology. 1.4, the unity of life. All forms of life have common features. All cells have DNA, and the community of life is based on this genetic material. DNA is the substance of genes, the units of inheritance that transmit information from parents to offspring. The molecular structure of DNA accounts for this function. Let us explain. Each DNA molecule is made up of two long chains coiled together into what is called a double helix. The chains are made up of 4 kinds of chemical building blocks. The chains include 4 different building blocks called bases with different colors and letter abbreviations of their names. The way DNA encodes a cell's information is analogous to the way we arrange letters of the alphabet into precise sequences with specific meanings. The word rat, for example, conjures up an image of a rodent. Tar and art, which contain the same letters, mean very different things. We can think of 4 building blocks, the 4 building blocks, as the alphabet of inheritance. Specific sequential arrangements of these 4 chemical letters encode precise information in genes, which are typically hundreds or thousands of letters long. A bacterial gene may direct the cell to build a purple pigment. A particular human gene may mean make the hormone insulin. All forms of life use essentially the same genetic code, which has made it possible to engineer cells that produce proteins normally found only in some other organism. Thus, bacteria can be used to produce insulin by inserting a gene for human insulin into bacterial cells. The diversity of life arises from differences in DNA sequences. In other words, from variations on the common theme of storing genetic information in DNA. Bacteria and humans are different because they have different genes, but both sets of instructions are written in the same language. 1. Order. All living things exhibit complex organization, as seen in the highly ordered structure of a sunflower. 2. Regulation. The environment outside an organism may change markedly, but mechanisms maintain an organism's internal environment within limits that sustain life. Regulation of the amount of blood flowing through the blood vessels in the large ears of a jackrabbit helps maintain a constant body temperature by adjusting heat exchange with the air. 3. Growth and development. Inherited information carried by genes controls the pattern of growth and development of organisms such as a Nile crocodile. 4. Energy processing. Organisms take in energy and transform it to perform all of life's activities. When a bear eats a fish, it will use the chemical energy stored in the fish to power its own activities and chemical reactions, metabolism. 5. Response to the environment. All organisms respond to environmental stimuli. A Venus flytrap closes its trap rapidly in response to the stimulus of a damselfly landing on it. 6. Reproduction. Organisms reproduce their own kind. An emperor penguin protects its baby. 7. Evolutionary adaptation. The appearance of a pygmy seahorse camouflages it in its environment. Such adaptations evolve over many generations as individuals with traits best suited to their environment pass them to offspring. These various organisms we've discussed illustrate some of the amazing diversity of life. In the next module, we see how biologists attempt to organize this diversity. Question: what is the chemical basis for all of life's kinship? Answer: DNA as the genetic material. 1.5. The diversity of life can be arranged into 3 domains. We can think of biology's enormous scope as having 2 dimensions. The vertical dimension, which we examined in module 1.1, is the size scale that stretches from molecules to the biosphere. But biology's scope also has a horizontal dimension, spanning across the great diversity of organisms existing now and over life's long history. Grouping species. Diversity is a hallmark of life. Biologists have so far identified and named about 1.8 million species, the term used for a particular type of organism, such as Panthera pardus, the leopard. Researchers identify thousands of additional species each year. Estimates of the total number of species range from 10 million to over 400 million. As an example, consider a small sample of the diversity of moths and butterflies. How do we make sense of so much diversity? Some of the tens of thousands of the species of the moth and butterfly collected at the National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C. are on display there now. There seems to be a human tendency to group diverse items according to similarities. We may speak of bears or butterflies, though we recognize that each group includes many different species. We may even sort groups into broader categories, such as mammals and insects. Taxonomy, the branch of biology that names and classifies species, arranges them into a hierarchy of broader and broader groups, from genus, family, order, class, and phylum to kingdom. The 3 domains of life. Until the last few decades, most biologists adopted a taxonomic scheme that divided all of the diversity of life into 5 kingdoms. But new methods, such as comparison of DNA sequences, have led to an ongoing reevaluation of the number and boundaries of kingdoms. New classification schemes have been proposed that range from 6 to dozens of kingdoms. As that debate continues, however, most biologists now agree that the kingdoms of life can be organized into 3 overarching groups called domains. The organisms in Figure 1.5b on the facing page are representatives of the 3 domains. And to explain, that diagram includes bacteria, domain Eukarya, domain Archaea, which includes plants, animals, and bacteria. Domain bacteria and domain Archaea both consist of prokaryotes, organisms with prokaryotic cells. Most prokaryotes are unicellular and microscopic. The photos of these prokaryotes were made with a scanning electron microscope, and the number along with the side indicates how many times these images were magnified. Domain bacteria, magnification 250 times. Domain Archaea, magnification 25,000 times in order to be visible. In the 5 kingdom system, bacteria and Archaea were combined in a single kingdom, but newer evidence from comparisons of DNA and other molecules suggests that they represent 2 very distinct branches of life, as you'll learn in chapters 15 and 16. Bacteria are the most diverse and widespread prokaryotes and are now divided among several kingdoms. In the photo of bacteria in Figure 1.5b, each of the rod-shaped structures is a bacterial cell. Many of the prokaryotes, known as Archaea, live in Earth's extreme environments, such as salty lakes and boiling hot springs. Domain Archaea also includes multiple kingdoms. The photo of Archaea in Figure 1.5b shows a colony comprised of many cells. All of the eukaryotes, organisms with eukaryotic cells, are now grouped into the various kingdoms of domain Eukarya. As you learned in Module 1.3, eukaryotic cells have a nucleus and other internal structures called organelles. Most aquatic or moist habitats support members of the domain Eukarya called protists. Protists are a diverse collection of mostly single-celled organisms. Some protists, including those commonly called algae, make their own food by photosynthesis. Another assortment of protists, commonly called protozoans, are animal-like in that they eat other organisms. The top center photo in Figure 1.5b shows a number of different protists in a drop of water viewed with a microscope, magnified 275 times. The large irregular bluish cell in the center is an amoeba, and the smaller cells are mostly single-celled algae. Also present are multicellular algae, the rod-like organisms. In the 5 kingdom scheme, protists were classified in a single kingdom, but evidence from molecular studies now indicates they include several different evolutionary lineages. The recent trend has been to split the protists into several kingdoms to accurately reflect their evolutionary relationships. The 3 remaining kingdoms within Eukarya contain multicellular eukaryotes. These 3 kingdoms are distinguished partly by their modes of nutrition. Kingdom Plantae consists of plants, which produce their own food by photosynthesis and have cells with rigid walls made of cellulose. The photo representing Kingdom Plantae is a tropical bromeliad, a plant native to the Americas. And it looks kind of like a stiff red flower with red leaves. Kingdom Fungi, represented by the mushrooms in Figure 1.5b, is a diverse group that includes molds, yeasts, and mushrooms. Fungi are mostly decomposers. They break down the remains of dead organisms and organic waste, such as leaf litter and animal feces, and absorb the nutrients into their cells. Animals attain food by ingestion, which means they eat other organisms. Most animals are motile and are made of cells that lack rigid walls. representing the kingdom of Animalia, animals, the sloth in figure 1.5b resides in the trees of American rainforests. There are actually members of 3 groups in the sloth photo. The sloth is clinging to a tree, Kingdom Plantae, and the greenish tinge in the animal's hair is a luxuriant growth of photosynthetic prokaryotes, domain bacteria. This photograph exemplifies a theme reflected in our book's title, Connections Between Living Things. The sloth depends on trees for food and shelter. The tree uses nutrients from the decomposition of the sloth species. The prokaryotes gain access to the sunlight necessary for photosynthesis by living on the sloth, and the sloth is camouflaged from predators by its green coat. Life's diversity and its interconnectedness are evident almost everywhere. We have looked at life's unity and surveyed its diversity. In the next module, we describe how evolution explains both the unity and the diversity of life. Question: to which of the 3 domains of life do we belong? Answer: Eukarya. 1.6. Evolution explains the unity and diversity of life. In November 1859, Charles Darwin published one of the most important and influential books ever written, entitled On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. Darwin's book was an immediate bestseller and soon made his name almost synonymous with the concept of evolution. Darwin stands out in history with people like Newton and Einstein, scientists who synthesized ideas with great explanatory power. Such comprehensive ideas are called theories. The Origin of Species articulated 2 main points. First, Darwin presented evidence to support the idea of evolution, that species living today are descendants of ancestral species. Darwin called his evolutionary theory descent with modification. It was an insightful phrase, as it captured both the unity of life, descent from a common ancestor, and the diversity of life, modification, as a species diverged from their ancestors. Darwin's second point was to propose a mechanism for evolution, a mechanism he called natural selection. Darwin synthesized this idea from observations that by themselves were neither profound nor original. Others had the pieces of the puzzle, but Darwin saw how they fit together. He inferred natural selection by connecting 2 readily observable features of life. Observation number 1, individual variation. Individuals in a population vary in many heritable traits. Observation number 2, overproduction of offspring. A population of any species has the potential to produce far more offspring than will survive to produce offspring of their own. Inference 1, unequal reproductive success. From these 2 observations, Darwin inferred that individuals are unequal in their likelihood of survival and reproducing. Those individuals with heritable traits best suited to the environment will leave the greatest number of healthy, fertile offspring. Inference number 2, over time, favorable traits accumulate in a population. Over many generations, a higher and higher proportion of individuals will have the advantageous traits. Unequal reproductive success is what Darwin called natural selection, because the natural environment selects for individuals with certain traits. And the product of natural selection is evolutionary adaptation, the accumulation of favorable traits in a population over time. Consider an imaginary beetle population that has colonized an area where the soil has been blackened by a recent brush fire. Initially, the population varies extensively in the inherited coloration of individuals from very light gray to charcoal coal. Now, consider a predator bird eats the beetles it sees most easily, the light-colored ones. This selective predation favors the survival and reproductive success of the darker beetles compared to the lighter ones. Now consider that the surviving beetles have reproduced. The population is now quite different from the original one, as natural selection has produced a change in the frequencies of the different colored beetles. Our example also illustrates that natural selection is not a creative process, but an editing mechanism. It can only select among the variations that are present in the population. We can summarize natural selection as follows. Natural selection occurs as a heritable variation, as heritable variations are exposed to environmental factors that favor the reproductive success of some individuals over others. Natural selection occurs as heritable variations are exposed to environmental factors that favor the reproductive success of some individuals over others. In our example, birds are the selecting environmental factor. Darwin realized that numerous small changes in populations caused by natural selection could eventually lead to major alterations of species. He proposed that new species could evolve as a result of the gradual accumulation of changes over long periods of time. We will explore evolution and natural selection in more detail in chapters 13 and 14. We see the exquisite results of natural selection in every kind of organism. Each species has its own set of evolutionary adaptations that evolve by means of natural selection. For example, the pangolin, a mammal that lives in East African rainforest. One of its main adaptations, its tough body armor of overlapping scales, protects it from most predators. The pangolin also has an unusually long tongue, which it uses to prod termites and ants out of their nest. Another mammal shown in figure 1.6 is the killer whale, or orca. It's adapted for life at sea. It breathes air through nostrils on top of its head and communicates with its companions by emitting a clicking sound. Orcas use sound echoes to detect obstacles and schools of fish or other prey. The pangolin's armor and the orca's echolocating ability arose over many generations as individuals with heritable traits that made them better adapted to their environment had the greatest reproductive success. Evolution is biology's core theme, the one idea that makes sense of all we know about life. Question: how does natural selection adapt a population of organisms to its environment? Answer: on average, those individuals with heritable traits best suited to the local environment produce the greatest number of offspring that survive and reproduce. This increases the frequency of those traits in the population. The process of science. 1.7. Scientists use two main approaches to learn about nature. The word science is derived from a Latin verb meaning to know. Science is a way of knowing. It stems from our curiosity about ourselves and the world around us. Science seeks natural causes for natural phenomena. Thus, the scope of science is limited to the study of structures and processes that we can observe and measure, either directly or with the help of tools, such as microscopes, that extend our senses. This dependence on direct observations that other people can confirm distinguishes science from belief in the supernatural. Science can neither prove nor disprove the existence of a God or supernatural power. for such questions are outside the bounds of science. Biology blends two main scientific approaches: discovery science, which is mostly about describing the nature, and hypothesis-based science, which is mostly about explaining nature. Most research combines these two forms of inquiry. Discovery science. Verifiable observations and measurements are the data of discovery science. In biology, discovery science describes life at its many levels, from the biosphere down to cells and molecules. An example is the sequencing of the human genome. While this research involves complicated methods and instruments, it is essentially just a detailed section and description of human DNA. Discovery science can lead to important conclusions based on a type of logic called inductive reasoning. This kind of reasoning derives general principles from a large number of specific observations. All organisms are made of cells is an inductive conclusion based on the discovery of cells in every microscopic biological specimen observed by biologists over 2 centuries of time. The careful observation of discovery science and the inductive conclusions they sometimes produce are fundamental to our understanding of nature. Hypothesis-based science. The observations of discovery science stimulate us to seek natural causes and explanations for those observations. Such inquiry usually involves the proposing and testing of hypotheses. A hypothesis is a proposed explanation for a set of observations. A good hypothesis leads to predictions that scientists can test by recording additional observations or by designing experiments. Deductive reasoning is the logic used in hypothesis-based science to come up with ways to test hypotheses. In deduction, the reasoning flows from the general to the specific. From general premises, we extrapolate to the specific results we should expect if the premises are true. If all organisms are made of cells, premise 1, and humans are organisms, premise 2, then humans are composed of cells, deduction. This deduction is a prediction that can be tested by examining human tissues. Theories in science. How is a theory different from a hypothesis? A theory in science is much broader in scope. It explains a great diversity of observations and is supported by a large and usually growing body of evidence. And theories continue to generate new hypotheses, which can be tested. Consider this question. What is the difference between discovery science and hypothesis-based science? Answer. In the first, scientists observe and describe objects and phenomena. In the second, they propose hypotheses, make deductions, and test predictions. (1.8) With hypothesis-based science, we pose and test hypotheses. We will explore the elements of hypothesis-based science with the help of 2 scientific investigations, one from everyday life and one from a research project on snakes. A case study from everyday life. We all use hypotheses in solving everyday problems. Let's say, for example, that your flashlight fails during a campout. That's an observation. The question is obvious. Why doesn't the flashlight work? 2 reasonable hypotheses based on past experience are that either the batteries in the flashlight are dead or the bulb is burned out. Figure 1.8 diagrams this campground inquiry. Again, you have observations. You pose yourself a question. Hypothesis number 1, dead batteries. Prediction, replacing batteries will fix the problem. You test the prediction. The test falsifies the hypothesis. Hypothesis number 2, prediction or hypothesis, burned out bulb. Prediction, replacing the bulb will fix the problem. you test the prediction. Test does not falsify hypothesis. In other words, the flashlight turns on. Now, let's use deductive reasoning. In the process of science, deduction usually takes the form of predictions of experimental results or observations. We should expect if a particular hypothesis is correct. We then test our predictions by carrying out the appropriate experiments or observations to see whether or not the results are expected. This deductive testing uses if-then logic. For example, if the dead batteries hypothesis is correct, and I replace the batteries with new ones, then the flashlight should work. If the flashlight still does not work, we can test our other hypothesis by replacing the flashlight bulb. The flashlight example illustrates two important points. First, a hypothesis must be testable. There must be some way to check its validity. Second, a hypothesis must be falsifiable. There must be some observation or experiment that could show that it is not true. As shown on the left figure, which I explained previously, the hypothesis that dead batteries are the sole cause of the problem was falsified by replacing the batteries with new ones. As shown on the right, the burned out bulb hypothesis is the more likely explanation. As I explained, the flashlight light did turn on. Notice that testing supports a hypothesis not by proving that it is correct, but by not eliminating it through falsification. Perhaps the bulb was simply loose, and the new bulb was inserted correctly. No amount of experimental testing can prove a hypothesis beyond a shadow of a doubt, because it is impossible to exhaust all alternative hypotheses. A hypothesis gains credibility by surviving various attempts to falsify it. A case study of hypothesis-based science. One way to learn more about how hypothesis-based science works is to examine a case study from actual scientific research. The story begins with a set of observations and generalizations from discovery science. Many poisonous animals are brightly colored, often with distinctive patterns. This so-called warning coloration apparently says dangerous species to potential predators. But there are also mimics. These imposters look like poisonous species, but are actually harmless. A question that follows from these observations is, what is the function of such mimicry? A reasonable hypothesis is that such deception is an evolutionary adaptation that reduces the harmless animal's risk of being eaten. In 2001, biologists David and Karen Finning, along with William Harcombe, one of their undergraduate students, designed an elegant set of field experiments to test the hypothesis that mimics benefit because predators confuse them with the harmful species. A poisonous snake called the eastern coral snake has warning coloration, bold alternating rings of red, yellow, and black. Predators rarely attack these snakes. The predators do not learn this avoidance by trial and error. A first encounter with a coral snake would usually be deadly. A predator making that mistake will not pass its genes on to any more offspring. Natural selection has apparently increased the frequency of predators that inherit an instinctive avoidance of the coral snake's coloration. The non-poisonous scarlet king snake mimics the ringed coloration of the coral snake. Both types of snakes live in North and South Carolina, but the king snake's geographic range also extends into regions where no coral snakes are found. The geographic distribution of these snakes made it possible for the researchers to test a key prediction of the mimicry hypothesis. Mimicry should help protect king snakes from predators, but only in regions where coral snakes also live. Avoiding snakes with warning coloration is an adaptation of predator populations that evolved in areas where the poisonous coral snakes are present. The mimicry hypothesis predicts the predators adapted to the warning coloration of coral snakes will attack king snakes less frequently than will predators in areas where coral snakes are absent. To test this prediction, Harcombe made hundreds of artificial snakes out of wire covered with a clay-like substance called plasticine. He made two versions of fake snakes, an experimental group with red, black, and yellow ring pattern of king snakes, and a control group of plain brown artificial snakes as a basis of comparison. The researchers placed equal numbers of the two types of artificial snakes in field sites throughout North and South Carolina, including the region where coral snakes are absent. After 4 weeks, they retrieved the snakes and recorded how many had been attacked by looking for bite or claw marks. The most common predators were foxes, coyotes, and raccoons, but black bears also attacked some of the artificial snakes. The data fit the key prediction of the mimicry hypothesis. Compared to the brown artificial snakes, the ringed snakes were attacked by predators less frequently, only in field sites within the geographic range of the poisonous coral snakes. The bar graph in figure 1.8e summarizes the results. The graph shows the results of the mimicry experiment. In places where coral snakes were absent, artificial king snakes were attacked 83% of the time, while artificial brown snakes were attacked 17%. Where coral snakes were present, artificial king snakes were attacked 16% of the time, while the artificial brown snakes were attacked 84% of the time. This case study is an example of a controlled experiment, one that is designed to compare an experimental group, the artificial king snakes in this case, with a control group, the artificial brown snakes. Ideally, the experimental and control groups differ only in the one factor the experiment is designed to test. In our example, the effect of the snake's coloration on the behavior of predators. Without the control group, the researchers would not have been able to rule out the number of predators in the different test areas as the cause of the different number of attacks on the artificial king snakes. The experimental design left coloration as the only factor that could account for the low predation rate of the artificial king snakes placed within the range of coral snakes. Both of these case studies illustrate the scientific method, a process of inquiry that involves observations, questions, hypotheses, predictions, and tests of predictions. But there is no rule book that says science must follow rigid steps. As in all quest, science includes elements of challenge, adventure, and luck, along with careful planning, reasoning, creativity, cooperation, competition, patience, and persistence. Question: why is it difficult to draw a conclusion from an experiment that does not include a control group? Answer: without a control group, you don't know if the experimental outcome is due to the variable you are trying to test or to some other variable. Biology and everyday life. Connection 1.9. Biology, technology, and society are connected in important ways. In this chapter, there's a picture on the left of Time magazine. The title is Special Report Global Warming. Be worried, be very worried. Caption: Biology and technology in the news. Beginning. Many issues facing society are related to biology. Most of these issues also involve our expanding technology. Science and technology are interdependent, but their basic goals differ. The goal of science is to understand natural phenomena. In contrast, the goal of technology is to apply scientific knowledge for some specific purpose. Scientists often speak of discoveries, while engineers more often speak of inventions. The beneficiaries of those inventions also include scientists, who use new technology in their research. And scientific discoveries often lead to the development of new technologies. Technology depends less on the curiosity that drives basic science than it does on the needs and wants of people and on the social environment of the times. Debates about technology center more on should we do it than can we do it? Should insurance companies have access to individuals' DNA information? Should we permit research with embryonic stem cells? Technology has improved our standard of living in many ways, but not without adverse consequences. Technology that keeps people healthier has enabled Earth's population to grow more than tenfold in the past 3 centuries to more than 6 billion. The environmental effects of this growth can be devastating. Global warming, toxic waste, acid rain, deforestation, nuclear accidents, and extinction of species are just some of the repercussions of more and more people wielding more and more technology. Science can help us identify such problems and provide insight into what course of action may prevent further damage. But solutions to these problems have as much to do with politics, economics, and cultural values as with science and technology. Now that science and technology have become such powerful aspects of society, every citizen has a responsibility to develop a reasonable amount of scientific literacy. The crucial science-technology-society relationship is a theme that adds to the significance of any biology course. So here's the question: how do science and technology interact? Answer: new scientific discoveries may lead to new technologies. New technologies may increase the ability of scientists to search for new knowledge. Evolution connection. 1.10. Evolution is connected to our everyday lives. Evolution is the core theme of biology. To emphasize the centrality of evolution to biology, we have added an evolution connection module to each chapter in this book. But is evolution connected to our everyday lives? And if so, in what ways? Evolution tells us that all living species are descendants of ancestral species that have become modified as natural selection adapts populations to their environments. As environments change, populations change. What accounts for these changes? Biologists now recognize the differences in DNA among individuals, populations, and species reflect the pattern of evolutionary change. Scientists have determined the order of billions of DNA bases in thousands of different species. Comparisons of those sequences allow us to identify genes shared across many species, study their actions in other species, and in some cases, search for new medical treatments. Identifying beneficial genes in relatives of our crop plants has permitted the breeding or genetic engineering of enhanced crops. The recognition that DNA differs between people has led to the use of DNA tests to identify individuals. DNA profiling is now used to help convict or exonerate the accused, determine paternity, and identify remains. Evolution teaches us that the environment matters because it is a powerful selective force for traits that best adapt populations to their environment. We are major agents of environmental change when we take drugs to combat infection or grow crops in pesticide-dependent monocultures or alter most of Earth's habitats. We have seen the effects of such environmental changes in antibiotic-resistant bacteria, pesticide-resistant pests, and endangered species, and increasing rates of extinction. How can evolutionary theory help? It can help us be more judicious in our use of antibiotics and pesticides, and develop strategies for conservation efforts. It can help us create flu vaccines and HIV drugs by tracing the evolution of these viruses. We hope this book will help you develop an appreciation for the evolution and for biology, and help you apply that understanding to evaluating issues ranging from your personal health to the well-being of the whole world. Biology offers us a deeper understanding of ourselves and our planet, and a chance to more fully appreciate life in all its diversity. So here's your question. How might an understanding of evolution contribute to the development of new drugs? Answer. As one example, we can find organisms that share our genes in similar cellular processes and test the actions and potential drugs in these organisms. The actions of potential drugs in these organisms. Chapter review. Reviewing the concepts. Biology is the scientific study of life. From sections 1.1 to 1.3, themes in the study of biology. Note, life's hierarchy of organization unfolds as follows: biosphere, to ecosystem, to community, to population, to organism, to organ system, to organ, to tissue, to cell, to organelle, to molecule. Starting at the bottom of the hierarchy, with each step upward, new properties emerge as a result of interactions among components of the lower levels. From 1.2, we need to remember that ecosystems are characterized by the cycling of chemical nutrients from the atmosphere and soil to producers, to consumers, to decomposers, and back to the environment. Energy flows one way through an ecosystem, from the sun to the producers, to consumers, and exits as heat. A cell is the basic unit of life, the lowest level of organization that can perform all activities required for life. Eukaryotic cells contain membrane-enclosed organelles, including a DNA-containing nucleus. Prokaryotic cells are smaller and lack such organelles. Systems biology models the complex interactions of biological systems, such as the molecular interactions within a cell. From sections 1.4 to 1.6, evolution, the core theme of biology. Note, DNA is the genetic information responsible for heredity and for programming the production of an organism's molecules. Each species' genes are coded in the sequence of the 4 building blocks, bases, making up DNA's 2 helically coiled chains. All organisms share a set of common features: ordered structures, regulation of internal conditions, growth and development, energy processing, response to environmental stimuli, the ability to reproduce, and evolutionary adaptations. 3 domains. Taxonomy names species and classifies them into a system of broader groups. Domain bacteria and archaea consist of prokaryotes. The eukaryotic domain, eukarya, includes various protist kingdoms, and the kingdoms fungi, plantae, and animalia. Evolution and natural selection. Evolution explains the unity and diversity of life. Charles Darwin synthesized the theory of evolution by natural selection. Natural selection is an editing mechanism that occurs when populations of organisms have inherited variations or are exposed to the environmental factors that favor the reproductive success of some individuals over others. All organisms have adaptations that have evolved by means of natural selection. From sections 1.7 to 1.8, the process of science. Scientific inquiry. In discovery science, scientists carefully observe and describe some aspect of the world and use inductive reasoning to draw general conclusions. In hypothesis-based science, they attempt to explain observations by testing hypotheses. Hypothesis-based science involves observations, questions, hypotheses as tentative explanations, deductions leading to predictions, and then tests of the predictions to see if the hypotheses are falsifiable. Deductive reasoning is used if a hypothesis is correct and we test one of its predictions by performing an experiment or making observations. Then a particular outcome will occur. In experiments designed to test hypotheses, the use of control groups and experimental groups helps to control variables. From section 1.9 to 1.10, biology and everyday life, biology, technology, and society. Technological advances stem from scientific research, and research benefits from technology. The science, technology, society relationship is an important aspect of a biology course. Evolution affects everyday life. In medicine, agriculture, forensics, and conservation. Environmental changes are powerful selective pressures on the adaptive traits of many populations. Connecting the concepts. 1. Biology can be described as having both a vertical scale and a horizontal scale. Try to explain what that means. 2. Complete the following map, organizing some of biology's major concepts. To clarify, biology is the study of blank, has changed through the process of blank, depends on DNA genetic code, which codes for diversity of life, which is seen in variations in cells as basic units of life. Also, consider these multiple choice questions to test your knowledge. Which of the following best describes logic of the scientific process? A, if I generate a testable hypothesis, test and observations will support it. B, if my prediction is correct, it will lead to a testable hypothesis. C, if my observations are accurate, they will support my hypothesis. D, if my hypothesis is correct, I can expect certain test results. E, if my tests are right, they will prove my hypothesis. Question 4. Amoebas and bacteria are grouped into different domains because A, amoebas eat bacteria. B, bacteria are not made of cells. C, bacterial cells lack a membrane-enclosed nucleus. D, bacteria decompose amoebas. E, amoebas are photosynthetic. Question 5. A biologist studying interactions among the protists in an ecosystem could not be working at which level in life's hierarchy? Choose carefully and try to explain your answer. A, the population level. B, the molecular level. C, the community level. D, the organism level. E, the organ level. Question 6. Which of the following questions is outside the realm of science? A, which organisms play the most important role in energy input to a savanna? B, what percentage of music majors take a biology course? C, what is the physical nature of the universe? D, what is the nature of the supernatural? E, what is the historical basis for the division of Earth's human population into ethnic groups? Question 7. Which of the following statements best distinguishes hypotheses from theories in science? A, Theories are hypotheses that have been proved. B. Hypotheses are tentative guesses. Theories are correct answers to questions about nature. C. Hypotheses usually are narrow in scope. Theories have broad explanatory power. D. Hypotheses and theories are different terms for essentially the same thing in science. E. Theories cannot be falsified. Hypotheses are expected to be falsified. Question 8. Which of the following best demonstrates the unity among all living organisms? A. Descent with modification. B. The structure and function of DNA. C. Emergent properties. D. Natural selection. E. The three domains. Question 9. The core idea that makes sense of all biology is A. The process of science. B. The correlation of function with structure. C. Systems biology. D. Evolution. E. Unity and diversity. Describing, comparing, and explaining. Question 10. In an ecosystem, how is the movement of energy similar to that of chemical nutrients? And how is it different? Question 11. Explain the role of heritable variations in Darwin's theory of natural selection. Question 12. Explain what is meant by this statement. The scientific process is not a rigid method. Question 13. Contrast technology with science. Give an example of each to illustrate the difference. Question 14. Explain what is meant by this statement. Natural selection is an editing mechanism rather than a creative process. Question 15, applying the concepts. The graph below shows the result of an experiment in which mice learned to run through a maze. In this graph, it shows that there were two groups of mice. One that received no reward for completing the maze. On day 1, the average time to complete the maze took them about 23 minutes. By day 6, it took them about 14 minutes. In another group, mice were given a food reward. At the beginning, on day 1, it took them also about 23 minutes to complete the maze. However, by day 6, it was taking them about 5 days to complete the maze. 5 minutes, rather. A. State the hypothesis and prediction that you think this experiment tested. B. Which was the control group in which the experimental, and why was a control group needed? C. List some variables that must have been controlled so as to not affect the results. D. Do the data support your hypothesis? Explain. Question 16. In an experiment similar to the mimicry experiment described in Module 1.8, a researcher found that there were more predator attacks on artificial king snakes in areas with coral snakes than in areas outside the range of coral snakes. From this, the researcher concluded that the mimicry hypothesis is false. Do you think this conclusion is justified? Why or why not? Question 17. The fruits of wild species of tomato are tiny compared to the giant beefsteak tomatoes available today. This difference in fruit size is almost entirely due to the larger number of cells in the domesticated fruits. Plant biologists have recently discovered genes that are responsible for controlling cell division in tomatoes. Why would such a discovery be important to producers of other kinds of fruits and vegetables? To the study of human development and disease, to our basic understanding of biology. Question 18. The news media and popular magazines frequently report stories that are connected to biology. In the next 24 hours, record all the ones you hear or read about in 3 different sources and briefly describe the biological connections you perceive in each story. Again, in the next 24 hours, record all the ones you hear or read about in 3 different sources and briefly describe the biological connections you perceive in each story. Answers. 1. The vertical scale of biology refers to the hierarchy of biological organization. And to review the question for clarity, biology can be described as having both a vertical scale and a horizontal scale. Explain what that means. Answer. The vertical scale of biology refers to the hierarchy of biological organization, from molecules to organelles, cells, tissues, organs, organ systems, organisms, populations, communities, ecosystems, and biosphere. At each level, emergent properties arise from the interaction and organization of component parts. The horizontal scale of biology refers to the incredible diversity of living organisms, past and present, including the 1.8 million species that have been named so far, which can be grouped into 3 domains: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya, and divided among numerous kingdoms. 2. Complete the following map, organizing some of biology's major concepts. If you have access to this map, the answers were A, life, B, evolution, C, natural selection, D, unity of life, E, 3 domains, or numerous kingdoms, 1.8 million species. All of those are acceptable answers. 3. Question 3. Which of the following best describes the logic of the scientific process? The answer was D. That is, if my hypothesis is correct, I can expect certain test results. 4. Amoebas and bacteria are grouped into different domains because C. Bacterial cells lack a membrane-enclosed nucleus. 5. A biologist studying interactions among the protists in an ecosystem could not be working at which level in life's hierarchy? Choose carefully and explain your answer, which is E. You may have been tempted to choose B, the molecular level. However, Protists may have chemical communication or interactions with other protists. No protists, however, have organs, which is why the answer is E, the organ level. 6. Which of the following questions is outside the realm of science? D. What is the nature of the supernatural? 7. Which of the following statements best distinguishes hypothesis from theories in science? The answer is C. Hypotheses usually are narrow in scope. Theories have broad explanatory power. Question 8. Which of the following best demonstrates the unity among all living organisms? The answer is B. The structure and function of DNA. Question 9. The core idea that makes sense of all biology is D. Evolution. 10. In an ecosystem, how is the movement of energy similar to that of chemical nutrients, and how is it different? Answer. Both energy and chemical nutrients are passed through an ecosystem from producers to consumers to decomposers. But energy enters an ecosystem as sunlight and leaves as heat. Chemical nutrients are recycled from the abiotic soil or atmosphere through plants, consumers, and decomposers and return to the air, soil, and water. (11) Explain what role the heritable variations in Darwin's theory of natural selection. Explain the role of heritable variations in Darwin's theory of natural selection. Answer. Darwin described how natural selection operates in populations whose individuals have varied traits that are inherited. When natural selection favors the reproductive success of certain individuals in a population more than others, it changes the proportions of heritable variations in the population, gradually adapting a population to its environment. Question 12. Explain what is meant by this statement. The scientific process is not a rigid method. Answer. In pursuit of answers to the questions about nature, a scientist uses a logical thought process involving the key elements, observations about natural phenomena, questions derived from observations, hypotheses posed as tentative explanations of observations, logical predictions of the outcome of tests if the hypotheses are true, and actual tests of hypotheses. Scientific research is not a rigid method because a scientist must adapt these key components to the set of conditions particular to each study. Intuition, chance, and luck are also part of science. Question 13. Contrast technology with science and give an example of each to illustrate the difference. Answer. Technology is the application of scientific knowledge. For example, the use of solar power to run a calculator, or heat a home is an application of our knowledge, derived by the scientific process of the nature of light as a type of energy and how light energy can be converted to other forms of energy. Another example is the use of pieces of DNA removed from bacteria to insert new genes into crop plants. This process, often called genetic engineering, stems from decades of scientific research on the structure and function of DNA for many kinds of organisms. 14. Explain what is meant by this statement. Natural selection is an editing mechanism rather than a creative process. Answer. Natural selection screens heritable variations from favoring the reproductive success of some individuals over others. These individuals pass more genes to the next generation than individuals that are not favored. As a result, the genetic makeup of a population changes. The change results from a screening, editing, of individuals and consequently their genes, not from the creation of new genes or new individuals. In 15, regarding the graph described previously, showing the results of an experiment in which mice learned to run through a maze, wherein those with no reward took longer to complete the maze than those with a reward by the end of the test, which took 6 days. Or rather, the experiment, which took 6 days. A, state the hypothesis and prediction that you think this experiment tested. Hypothesis: giving rewards to mice will improve their learning. Prediction: if mice are rewarded with food, they will learn to run a maze faster. B, which was the control group in which the experimental? Why was a control group needed? Remember, the groups included a no reward and a food reward group. Answer: the control group was the mice that were not rewarded. Without them, it would be impossible to know if the mice that were rewarded decreased their time running the maze only because of practice. C, list some variables that must have been controlled so as not to affect the results. Answer: both groups of mice should be about the same age. Both experiments should be run at the same time of day and under the same conditions. D, do the data support your hypothesis? Explain. Answer: yes. The data show that the rewarded mice began to run the maze faster by day 3 and improved their performance, ran faster than the control mice each day thereafter until day 6. 16. In an experiment similar to the mimicry experiment described in Module 1.8, a researcher found that there were more predator attacks on artificial king snakes in areas with coral snakes than in areas outside the range of coral snakes. From this, the researcher concluded that the mimicry hypothesis is false. Do you think this conclusion is justified? Why or why not? Answer: the researcher needed to compare the number of attacks on artificial king snakes with attacks on artificial brown snakes. It may be that there were simply more predators in the coral snake areas, or that the predators were hungrier than the predators in the other areas. The experiment needed a control and proper data analysis. Question 17. The fruits of wild species of tomato are tiny compared to the giant beefsteak tomatoes available today. This difference in fruit size is almost entirely due to the larger number of cells in the domesticated fruits. Plant biologists have recently discovered genes that are responsible for controlling cell division in tomatoes. Why would such a discovery be important to producers of other kinds of fruits and vegetables, to the study of human development and disease, to our basic understanding of biology? Answer: if these cell division control genes are involved in producing the larger tomato, they may have similar effects if transferred to other fruits or vegetables. Cancer is a result of uncontrolled cell division. One could see if there are similarities between the tomato genes and any human genes that could be related to human development or disease. The control of cell division is a fundamental process in growth, repair, and asexual reproduction, all important topics in biology. And 18. The news media and popular magazines frequently report stories that are connected to biology. In the next 24 hours, record all the ones you hear or read about in 3 different sources and briefly describe the biological connections you perceive in each story. Answer: virtually any news report or magazine contains stories that are mainly about biology, or at least have biological connections. How about biological connections in advertisements? Consider that next. In the next chapter, The Life of the Cell, Unit 1, we will review the chemical basis of life, the molecules of cells, a tour of the cell, the working cell, how cells harvest chemical energy, photosynthesis using light to make food. Thank you for listening to this section of the book. Continue to learn